Right now, I'm thinking about 3 crop years in my head right now today, and I will be for the next 2 months, right? So, I'm trying to think about the 24 crop that we're trying to finish harvesting and that we're getting into the bin. We're trying to sell 25 crop, right? And trying to build a plan for 25. And where do we want to go to 25? How do we set ourselves up for success? But then I'm starting to think about 2026.
Welcome to a special remote edition of Around the Farm, the podcast about all things ag. I'm your host, Andy Folta.
And I'm your host, Tom Versman. And today we got Chris Kallal with us today. We pulled him out of the field. He was clawing to get back in, but we're excited to have him with us. We're taking that pre-harvest break. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do with Bayer.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So, my name is Chris Kallal. I'm a technical agronomist for DEKALB Asgrow in West Central Illinois. I've been with the organization about 25 years. Started back in the day when Monsanto was putting this whole thing together, and after they'd bought Asgrow, DEKALB, and Holdens and corn states. I've done a couple different roles, all in West Central Illinois. So I've done chemistry sales, I've done seed sales. I was a sales agronomist for a while when we had a role called a local field advisor, and then spent the last 12 years in the technical agronomist role, supporting, again, the DEKALB Asgrow business in West Central Illinois.
You know, there's been a lot of things, right, Andy, going on this harvest. I think everything across the board seems to have come up. We've got some really good corn out there. We've got some corn that is really good, but we've got corn that maybe is even better. And then even soybeans too. Soybeans are looking good in some areas, while maybe in others there's some challenges. But that's why you're here today, Chris. We'd love for you to share what you're seeing out there, and maybe, Andy, why don't we start with the weather? I don't know if that's something you'd want to jump into or dive into there.
Yeah. FieldView, a podcast from a company that used to be called Climate. We can talk about the weather. So, Chris, when you're out there in West Central Illinois, I think that's a pretty good spot thinking about, the overall geography of the U.S., kind of right there, smack dab in the center of the Midwest. How has the weather been looking, and how's that been affecting what you've been seeing and having conversations with farmers and dealers out in the marketplace?
Yep. Yeah. So, as I think about it, and you can go back to, some stuff that Dr. Belo does, the weather is the most impactful thing on the crop that we raise every year. It's the number one factor. And I would say, for the most part, we had a very favorable weather pattern across the entire growing season this year. So locally across my district, we had a pretty dry early April. So we got in early April and got a lot of the crop planted. The vast majority in my geography, we got that early planting window that was dry. We were able to, get a lot of acres planted. Fast forward a little bit, we had a few heavy rains, but not too many that we had any stand establishment issues. So we had a little bit of a hiatus there about the first part of May that knocked us out for a little while, but then we got back in the middle of May and was able to finish it up. So overall, planting season was, I would say, very, kind of more on the favorable side than the less favorable. May into June, we were a little bit on the drier side, but that's okay. I'm okay, right? If I'm going to take a little bit of a stress during the crop, that's probably when I want to do it, because the plant can take a considerable amount of stress during its vegetative stages of growth. So we got some relief right around the 4th of July time period. We got some timely rains right around 4th of July, kind of broke that cycle, which is a perfect time, right? Because that's the time we're getting into pollination and getting into grain field, which is one of the most critical points of that plant's life cycle. So we managed to catch some pretty good timely rains, decent weather, decent temperatures. We were able to cool down at night. I would say we had probably an extended grain fill period this year because we, again, some of those cooler nights that, plants like to rest just like what we do, right? So they want to rest at night. They were able to do that and extend that grain fill period, further into the fall. And I think if you roll all those things together, I would say, we had a very favorable weather pattern across most of our geography. Certainly, there's some situations where that's not the case, right? There's areas that had some extremely heavy rains. I've got part of my geography that I think it was May 25th. It was a Friday evening that they got 5 to 7 inches of rain, and that caused some really some a lot of flooding and a lot of crops had just gotten planted. And so tremendous amount of replant in that part of the world. But, for the most part, across a large portion of my geography, pretty favorable weather. And then this fall has been just almost beautiful for harvest. We've taken almost no breaks since we started harvest. So guys have been able to continue to just keep running, and several guys that are done, and a lot of guys that are very close to the finish line, and we'll be wrapping things up here in the very near future.
Yeah. So, I know I'm thinking back to the conversation we had last month, Tom, with Luke, whenever we were talking around, developing a plan. That was all around farm safety. I'm interested, when we think about weather, it's obviously something, farmers, dealers, and their advisors manage throughout the entire season. But when you're thinking about getting into that harvest mindset, how are you having conversations around, either weather management or planning around the weather to set up for a successful harvest?
There's a lot of money on every acre that's sitting out there. And so there's a lot at risk, right? So, I mean, I who knows what Mother Nature is going to give us. But I generally am always one that I'm trying to push people along to say, hey, look, we've had a good year. We've had a good environment. We've got the crop looks really good. Yeah, we may not have a lot of disease, or we may not have a lot of stock quality concerns today, but that we don't know what tomorrow's going to hold or next week's going to hold. And a lot of guys have moved to high-speed planters. We can plant our crop. Most guys can plant a crop in 5 to 10 days, and it takes us 4 to 6 weeks to harvest it. And so there's an imbalance there that you've got to think through. And how do you manage, and how do you work through that, and how do you pick products and what do you do to try to help products stay alive as long as they can, and all that, to just help manage getting all that harvested in the fall, because it's a really bad day when you've got $1,000+ per acre sitting out there in the fall, and you get a windstorm. The next thing you know, it's all on the ground. I generally feel like I've got a cattle prod a lot of times in the fall in my hand, trying to get guys to get out there and, hey, let's get after it. I think we all feel a lot better when it's in the bin.
Yeah, 100%. And I think around the field that's surrounding where I'm sitting right now, I mean, it was a great soybean crop and harvest, but it did get a little bit dry here in Missouri, and it turned off, and some of those pods started busting open, and we had beans that were coming out of the pods. And now I've got, it seems like, a double crop stand of soybeans out there, which I think the deer are going to love. But to your point, it's all about the bottom line and trying to get that into the bin. So I think that's a great thing. And you have that conversation year long about prepping and planning for harvest, even at the beginning when you're making your plan for planting.
It seems like guys are always worried about and always scared of picking, too wet of grain in the fall and not being able to get it done. But to your notion, I mean, there's a lot of guys right now that are picking 9-10% soybeans. They're picking corn that's 13-14% corn, and there's harvest losses that are involved in that. And so we've got losses per acre that are mounting up because of that. Now, could we have picked alternative products to help manage that? To some degree, but we can't do it all with just picking a 4-season product, because they too will at some point dry down enough that they'll eventually get there as well.
No, that makes sense, Chris. And just to put you on the spot with one here too, what's your favorite weather app? What is your weather app of choice when you are monitoring the weather?
Well, yeah. So obviously, I use the Climate FieldView app a lot.
Great answer.
I go online. I probably use the online version more than I do the web-based tool, probably more than I do the app, just to try to look at historical perspectives and look at GDU accumulations and rainfall accumulation and all that kind of stuff to track it through planting time. That's probably what I use the most. But yeah, I mean, obviously I do have some others that I use just to check, what's the, how soon is it going to rain, and when
Sure.
For more immediate needs. Yeah, I do have some others that I use as well.
Well, give us one here. Toss one out besides FieldView.
I mean, I'll use AccuWeather. I'll use the Weather Channel. I mean, those are, sometimes I bounce those around, just compare and contrast, again, how much rain is in the forecast, and, what are we going to get, an inch? We get an inch and a half, try to use some of those to ballpark it. I do have one that's similar type deal to what Climate does as well. That is trying to do rainfall by the rainfall estimates early, right away, based off of the radar. Because I can look at it on a map of the state of Illinois,
Right.
my whole territory, or even the entire state or the Midwest or whatever.
For
I'm a
sure.
visual guy, and it puts it all on a map for me.
I understand that.
Yeah, and not to pivot away from Tom, but back to climate. I know that's one thing that I've seen. When I was out in the field, consulting with customers, or a TA that'd be consulting with customers, having that visual map when a customer opts to share data to you, which we've seen a lot of customers want to share to a TA or an FSR or a CBA so that they can help them throughout the season. I'm curious, as a TA, how many customers do you have that are sharing, data to you, or that you're just managing and giving advice to on a, daily, weekly basis?
I would say there's a difference there between how many people and how many people we're doing it effectively too, because it's a challenge, right? I mean, as I look across my geography, I support 4 Asgrow DEKALB FSRs in West Central Illinois. That changed over the summer. I had one more added to the geography that I support, but it's an area that I'm familiar with. I used to work it years ago, and it's actually where I grew up at. Across that geography, I've got, it's about 15, 16 counties that I'm covering. With I could take a stab at it. I mean, there's probably close to 90 to 100 salespeople that are selling Asgrow DEKALB across that footprint. So, the number of people can add up really, really quickly across that footprint. I've got probably a good dozen or so that have their FieldView accounts shared with me that I can go in and look at, how things are progressing in their farm and how things are performing. So I can go in and kind of constantly monitor those if I want to. I've got several dealers and several growers that, will send me, kind of weekly or sometimes even daily updates. I've got growers that'll text me every time they finish a field, and they'll send me a text.
Sure.
They finished picking this hybrid and this is what it did. Any noteworthy side-by-sides they may have done in that field or whatever. So I would say probably consistently people that are doing it, I'd say let's put it in that, maybe 15 to 20 range of people that are, pretty religious about sharing the information with me and doing it at a high quality level. And then, get a glimpse of a lot more than that regularly through the fall.
Thinking about when I first got to know you, I know this would have been probably in July and August. You were out scouting fields, a lot of customers' fields, right? And I know you were just kind of determining how certain products were performing and how any maybe disease was expanding throughout, just depending on where you were. But maybe let's start with corn, and let's talk about a little bit of what you saw in August and what you're seeing now as that corn's going through the combine, and really we're seeing the yields on specific products, and maybe shed some light on what we're seeing in that Illinois geography.
Overall, I would say, foliar diseases weren't very prevalent this year. So, not a lot of gray leaf spot, a little bit of common rust, but not very much. Several of us were a little bit nervous that Hurricane Beryl that came through about 4th of July time period might have brought us some southern rust, because southern rust doesn't overwinter here. It stays to the south of us. And, that hurricane came up through Texas and right into central Illinois. And that's how we get corn earworm a lot of times, right? Because they all are to the south of us and they ride up here on storms. And I'd say luckily we didn't end up with very much southern rust out of that. Thank goodness. So a lot of our, northern corn leaf blight, there's a little bit of northern corn leaf blight that popped up here and there. Probably more so, again, there's hybrids are varying their susceptibility. So some hybrids showing a little bit more than others. But I would say, generally speaking, all those types of diseases, very low pressure this year. Did have some areas that a little bit more tar spot. I would say that's probably the one that gets a little bit more publicity lately, right? Is to think about tar spot. In most cases, the tar spot came in late enough in this growing season that I don't feel like it impacted yield all that much, especially of the April corn. Now, the May corn, it could be hurting a little bit more of, right? Because it would have came in during an early part of its life cycle. So it would have came, where the infection would have happened earlier in that plant's life. And so it has more time to impact yield. My personal perception, and I'm not as used to dealing with tar spot as some of my peers are, like Jim Donnelly and others, but I think the tar spot is probably having more of an impact on some of the standability issues that guys might be having today out there right now than it is on yield. because it not only does it impact yield, but it can make stalk degradation speed up rapidly and can cause cannibalization of that stalk. And so then we get secondary stalk infections that happen. And so I think that's where we might be, seeing some issues with that tar spot that we had that came in late, but it's not terribly rampant. You can find tar spot in every single cornfield you go in. Some of them look worse than others. But, again, at the end of the day, I don't feel like tar spot hurt our yield all that much this year.
Oh, and then we had the other hurricane come through not too long ago, a few weeks ago, right? And I don't know if I never even got a chance to ask you, but when I was driving through Western Illinois, the winds were pretty strong during that time. You could see the corn really bending. I don't know if that caused any damage that you saw or anything that concerned you at all with that.
We got very lucky. We're pretty fortunate. I mean, we had some 30 plus mile an hour wind gust, up to 35, 40 mile an hour wind gust. We had sustained winds, a lot of sustained winds, 20, 25 mile an hour. So we hit some pretty heavy winds, and I was pretty nervous, right? I mean, I was concerned, right? Because if you think about, that was just a couple of weeks ago. A lot of corn was mature. I just talked about tar spot, and it does impact standability and the quality of that stalk. There is some crown rot that's out there this year as well that also impacts stalk quality. I would say for the most part, we fared pretty well. I think we got very fortunate across central Illinois. I think there's some other parts of the country that didn't fare quite so well as what we did, but overall, across my geography and some of my peers locally, I think we fared pretty well, thank goodness. I've probably got more stalk quality issues from storms that happened back in August. Just
Gotcha.
a few little random things, right? Just a little spot here, a little spot there that might have hit, a dozen fields or so in a very localized spot, localized geography, but on a wide scale. Most of our standability, or the corn standability, is pretty good.
That's super interesting. And so, on the other side of the coin, so thinking back to August, like Tom said, and you're walking around with your hula hoop going out and checking soybeans, how has that progressed from August to now on the soybean front?
Soybeans have finished exceptionally well as well. Some guys have got the best soybean crop they've ever had. So a lot of guys are setting field records, setting farm records, having a tremendous soybean yield. Unfortunately, not everybody's blessed with that, but there are some there's some exceptions to that, right? I mean, I've got some guys that are pretty disgruntled and a little bit concerned, and so trying to dig in and what disease might it have been? Where was our fertility levels at? Did we put the wrong variety in the wrong situation? Did we have stand issues? And so there are some things that are coming to light on some of those situations. And like most every agronomist, the typical answer is it's not just one thing, right? We generally can try to blame 2, 3, 4, 5 things for what may or may not be going on in a field, and why people might be having some not as good of experience with the product as they may like. But soybeans have been a bright spot. I mean, like I said, some guy, field averages over 100. A lot of guys have field averages in the 90s. Carrying, like I said, just it's been a fun fall for most people on soybeans. A lot of guys are done with soybeans or getting real close to finishing up. Again, some of them unfortunately are a little bit too dry, but it's been a good year.
Thinking about when I moved to Illinois and 90 bushel, 100 bushel soybeans, that's amazing. Here in Missouri, we'd be extremely glad to have those. But
you'd be glad to about half, wouldn't you?
Oh man, that'd be great. There are places this year, I should say, that
there's 50, 60 bushal beans in Missouri. Yeah.
It was a good year here.
It depends on where you're at in Missouri. So yeah,
very true.
That's right.
Very true. But thinking when I moved to Illinois and thinking about your time with the company for 25 years, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of trends. I know a trend that was new to me when I moved to Illinois was beans before corn. What other trends are you seeing, either people trying to adopt or that have adopted over the last several years that interest you from an agronomic standpoint?
Yeah, that early bean and beans planted early has been one of the biggest ones, and it's been a lot of fun. I think that has made a huge difference in our soybean yields, and just overall the intensity of the management that we're putting on soybeans versus what we did 10, 15 years ago. I've tried for years to tell people, I'm like, because most guys are like, hey, let's go get the planter set. Let's get it out of the field. Let's go get the planter set. So you dump corn in it and you go to the field and you tinker around, right? And then that's how we kind of used to do it, right? And so I totally get, I'm like, let's set the planter with beans. dump beans in the planter and let's go plant beans first. And there's a lot of people now, I'd say the majority of people now are kind of in that mindset that, at least beans and corn at the same time or beans first. Not a lot of guys are going to the field anymore with corn being the very first thing. I'd say other trends that have been, that have picked up, probably the biggest one would be is around fungicide use. There's far more acres to get one application. There's a lot of people playing with 2 applications. One of them on beans and some data that I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing here soon. Because one of the things with us planting soybeans as early as we do now, we're flowering early June. And if I could draw it on a map, you think about, there's typically a critical period and date and then the length of the nighttime that triggers that plant to switch to flowering, right? And so normally that happens after the summer solstice. That's what we traditionally always used to talk about, right? We always used to think about is that, we would put on all this vegetative growth until our summer solstice on June 21st. And then we would hit that critical period of length of the night that would trigger flowering. Well, there's a corresponding time that happens ahead of the summer solstice, right? So because it's a bell curve. And so that's why a lot of these beans are flowering, let's say June 10th, June 12th, June 8th, even, why we're flying so early. So let's fast forward a couple weeks. When you're going to do a fungicide application in soybeans, we typically say R3 is the perfect time to try to do that, which is a pod 3/16 inch in length at one of the 4 uppermost nodes. That's the technical definition of R3. Because we're planting beans early, we're flowering early, we hit R3 in late June. But then, depending upon what happens we'll catch some nice rains and we'll bounce back and forth for almost a month there. From the end of June until the third week of July or so, we'll kind of bounce back and forth between R3 and R2 on a soybean plant. So one of the questions that a lot of people have been posing the last year or two is, which time in R3 is the right time to spray those beans? Do I spray it the first time they hit R3, which happens in the end of June, or do I try to wait until the last time they get R3, which might be this third week of July? And so we've got some people that have actually gone out and done some of both, right? And so I was challenging a lot of guys this year. I'm like, hey, we're in R3. Let's go spray 2/3 of the field today. And then let's come back in 3 weeks and spray 2/3 of the field again. So you end up with 1/3 of the field early, 1/3 of the field late, and 1/3 of the field both. And so let's try to figure out which one of those is the right time, if there is. But at the end of the day, a fungicide on soybeans, a fungicide protects what it hits or the leaves that are present. It doesn't translocate through the plant. So that's why generally we favor the later calendar date, because the plant's bigger, more leaves, more nodes. So we're protecting more of the entire plant. But to get back to it's just kind of been a fun conversation. A really long answer to the question of one of the other trends is playing with multiple fungicide applications to try to help, what can we do to try to keep raising the bar and getting more yield out of our fields?
And Chris, you did a video, I think, on that on Kallal's Corner. Shout out to your videos that are posted on Facebook. So, but I'd love for you to dive in more and, what were some of the takeaways on that trend that you learned, or maybe some of our customers learned? Because I know, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I remember when I watched the video, I think there were specific counties or specific areas where you were really pushing that second application of fungicide. And I can't remember if that was in beans there. I think it was, but maybe shed some light there.
Actually, it was in corn.
It was in corn. Okay.
That's okay. That's all right. It was in corn. And the thought process there was, and again, kind of ties back to a lot of the things we've already talked about, guys. So it's, we had a lot of fungicide applications in corn went out 4th of July period or the 2 weeks thereafter, right? Fast forward, I know what a lot of labels say. I know what a lot of manufacturer reps say. I generally give a fungicide 3 to 4 weeks time of efficacy. And I know some people like to think 4 or 5, maybe even 6 weeks. And I think that's a lot to ask of a fungicide product to potentially protect us that long. Now, you might be able to do that if you're running some of the higher rates, right? So if you elevate your rate, that extends your half-life, that extends your window of coverage. But where I was going with that, and I had some people panic, unfortunately, whenever I did that video, But what I was trying to call out is that, especially on some of the May planted corn, we had fungicide applications that, let's say, carried us to about August 20th, if you will, right? So maybe that May planted corn, let's say they made a fungicide application around July 20th. So let's fast forward to about August 20th. That fungicide had pretty much ran out by then, right? Well, that corn, because of a May planting date, wasn't projected to black layer until sometime around the middle of September. So we had another 3 to 4 weeks of that corn's life cycle, right? We weren't even showing a milk line yet on the kernel. So, which generally, if you're not showing a milk line, you've probably got at least 3 weeks, but typically 4 weeks till you're in a black layer. So my concern was that we had tar spots setting in there, and that was going to we had more time to impact the yield of that plant, or to in a negative manner. So again, kind of back to some of the things we talked about. Yeah, I imposed undue panic on some people with that video, but I was trying to caution people that, hey, if you've got May planted corn that you've already made a fungicide application on, you might want to go out and take a peek at it and see how bad your tar spot is, because you've got another month that plant is unprotected from fungicide.
Got it. That makes sense.
That tar spot could damage or it could impact the yield negatively on that. And so let's go look at it. Maybe we need to get another fungicide application on to get us to grain fill, or get us to black layer and get us through grain fill.
You talked about how soybeans reacted to fungicide a little bit and how it's a little different, right? How does corn react, and is there a difference there, or is it pretty similar?
I would say it's somewhat similar in that you've got roughly in a corn plant, by the time you hit pollination, which is when most people try to target that fungicide application, you're going to have roughly 50 to 60 days to get you to black layer. And that's what we want to try to do, is we want to try to protect that plant through grain fill so that we can put as much assimilants into the kernel as we possibly can to drive yield. In most cases, we're protecting a good half plus of that window of time we've got to have an impact on corn yield. And so that's where some people are looking at, well, do I make 2 applications? That way I'm fully protected across the entire time period. Do I just bump up my rates and so that I can extend that window longer? And so it's the conversation has changed a lot anymore, that it's, there are far more people that are interested in, should I make a second application? Could I make a second application? Can I still positively impact yield, or can I save enough yield that I'll get a positive return on investment? Unfortunately, you're trying to look into a crystal ball, right? Whenever you're trying to make some of those decisions,
sure.
And what do we think that things are going to play out as? And obviously, with the grain market eroding a little bit like it has, it takes a few more bushels to have it a positive ROI, but I certainly enjoy engaging in the conversation with folks and trying to think through what is the best strategy, and then looking back and how did we fare? What did we learn out?
And I think that's a really good natural segue. You talk about trying to manage ROI, and you've talked about all these disparate pieces of information that you're trying to squirrel away for next year to help make a recommendation. So, we talk about seeing the data and cataloging all these things. You talk about on-farm trials. What are you looking for in season that you then take to make a recommendation, either live in season to another farmer or catalog for next year? What are kind of the top things that you're keeping in mind?
Yeah, great question. So I'll go into the season with kind of the traditional recommendation, right? So, I sit here today and say, hey, the traditional recommendation on fungicide application in corn is VTR1, right? It's kind of always been that way. It's always been the peak of the bell curve for yield response. That should be our number one plan going into next year. Soybeans, same deal. R3, peak of the bell curve. That's when we should plan to do it. Now, but we've got to be probably a little bit more agile than what we were years ago, because tar spot has kind of changed the game. So let's be, in corn and soybeans, we don't have that disease out there in my part of the country that's probably looming doom and gloom as bad as what tar spot is in corn. So we need to be agile. We need to think through, okay, what's the weather like? How fast are we seeing disease symptomology show up? All of those types of things. Just as we started scouting, we started looking at again the how much rainfall have we had, and what kind of humidity levels, and all those sorts of things, right? And then there's apps out there and people that are trying to drive help, models to try to help predict when we might see outbreaks and how severe in different geographies. So you got to try to take a lot of different sources and think through those, and sometimes sift through the crap to figure out what's real and what isn't, and what's going on, to try to make a sound recommendation. And and unfortunately, a lot of times we're wrong, right? I mean, because something happens, something changes, something didn't play out like we thought it would, and so we try to do the best, based on the information we have and how that, and what our experience has been in the past. And but sometimes we decide, well, that may not have been the right thing to do, and we catalog that and we put that away for the next time.
That's something that's always really interested me in, like, the place that a TA plays with farmers on their operation. Like you talked about, you have 90 to 100 sellers. Each of them have X number of different farmers. All of them, I mean, I remember whenever Steve Trosher, when I was in Missouri, or Edwards, when I was out in Illinois, when they would come on farm, the farmer looked at that TA as, kind of a cut above the rest, because you have that agronomic mindset and you have really sound recommendations, because you do take all of this information and boil it down into a really concise recommendation. I mean, even if it doesn't work 100% of the time, the best hybrid wins a plot, 75% of the time?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're trying to mitigate loss.
I love sometimes going by, and I'm not much of a sports guy at all, but I mean, it's the greatest baseball players ever, right? I mean, what their batting averages are, right? I mean, Michael Jordan, what his free throw percentage was, right? I mean, even the greatest people in the world at sports lose or strike out or whatever, right? I mean, it's frustrating at times when a hybrid will lose and a seller just, they don't know how to deal with it. And it's like, it happens. I mean, some of the best corn hybrids in the market only win 75% of the time, and that's some of the best hybrids on the market. So that means they're going to lose 25% of the time. And I lost one. Okay, well, unfortunately that happened, but I don't get as worked up about it as some people do, just because as long as I still got the odds in my favor, I'll go to Vegas. So
yeah, well, that's where data and cataloging that information is becoming so important, so that when those things happen, we can look back and and learn from that next year. Because we only get, the average farmer gets 50 chances to be the CEO of their operation and make a decision, which really puts it in perspective.
So, Chris, Thanksgiving is getting close. It's right around the corner. Hard to believe it's right around the corner. What are your plans, and what are you looking forward to the most about Thanksgiving? Hey, what are you the most thankful for?
So, on a personal level, so what am I excited about for Thanksgiving? On a personal level, obviously spending a lot of time with family and having some great food, especially some pumpkin pie. Maybe even get out the whiskey sour slushes. It's kind of a family tradition within my family, some whiskey slushes. And so I always make a fresh batch of those for every Thanksgiving. And so that, and then new product launch right thereafter. And then, so I guess that's what I'm looking. And then from a professional perspective, new products.
Yeah, the new products are your Christmas. That's what you get to open up. That's nice.
Yes, yeah. It's an early Christmas. Yes, yeah.
Andy, maybe a future episode, we can maybe get some of the product managers on here and do the draft.
We could. I think it'd be fun to go through. I've always seen those snake drafts where you go through and you look back and maybe have product managers and TAs do a snake draft of their all-time favorite hybrids or varieties. But since we're doing a remote version of Around the Farm, I pulled something out of the museum. You talk about old hybrids. So this is from the first ever field scripts that we had, and it was DKC 6297.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really good place to end when we think about all of this, data that we've been collecting through harvest, all the learnings you've had in that first of your 3 years. You talked about 2024. The first step is taking that and building into 2025. So what are some of your predictions for Plant 25, or key things that we've learned in 24 or even 23 that you're taking out into 25?
Yeah. So predictions, that might be a little bit tough to try to think about what are my predictions. But I guess things that I think about and things that I try to coach people on is that, don't get too narrow in scope. It's probably one of the things that I think a lot of us struggle with. To me, we kind of put our blinders on a little bit and we think to, what just happened to me this year, or what happened in this field, or what happened in this plot. One plot from this year told me actually what I should have done in that field this year for this growing season, right? One plot doesn't tell me anything that I need to do for next year. I need to look at multiple, right? So widen the scope a little bit. Use your resources, whoever that is, right? If that's the guy you're buying seed from, if that's your neighbor, if that's your the guy that you know a couple counties away, whatever it is, right? I mean, use your resources, use your network of people that you've got to try to think through, how are products performing? What trends did we see? What did this guy like? What did this guy not like? How do we take that and then try to work towards what we want to do next year? Because far too often, right? We try to set ourselves up to alleviate the pain next year that we just felt this year. And most of the time, the pain changes, or what causes the pain changes. Obviously, I always try to tell people, let's set ourselves up for success, right? Because let's not. Unfortunately, sometimes we set ourselves up for failure right out of the gate. We might make some knee-jerk decisions. We might decide that we're going to cut this expense or cut that expense. And unfortunately, those things, can be quite damning, unfortunately, with the decisions we made. Based on the growing season we had this year, unfortunately, probably, guys will probably be more apt to go to the field and plant as fast as they can, as early as they can, coming this year on corn. So even though we talked about how things dry down and spreading out to maturities and worrying about picking 12, 13% corn at the end of the day, there was a lot of guys that could have finished in April and they didn't. And then they were upset about not being able to finish until the middle of May. This year it just happened to work out where, that middle of May stuff wasn't always better. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I would suspect guys will gear up and they'll go to the field and they'll hammer it in as fast as they possibly can, just because that's, they kind of remember that from this past year. So, those are at least a couple things that I think about planning season as we go next year. I do think, again, we'll have to see where commodity prices, how things kind of shake out. But a lot of guys after this year were, starting to kind of think, hey, maybe 2-pass fungicide might be the way to go on a number of my acres. And so I think there might be more appetite for that going into next year. And I think that conversation will continue to uptick, because, again, I'd say there's guys that have had some unbelievable crops this year, great yields, 80s, 90s on soybeans, some over 100, some guys having field averages in the 270s, 280s, 290s on corn. And so, sometimes we have to think about, managing for 300 versus managing for 250. It sometimes is a different conversation.
Yeah. I guess great. And, widening the scope, I think, is always a good call. But then the network, hopefully this conversation's been insightful for, people who are listening. But, if you haven't connected with a TA, I think this is a pretty good call to action to do so. Because, this is just a quick conversation that we've had. And, having that conversation locally is even more powerful.
Well, hey, I think, Chris, it's been great having you, and thank you so much for taking time to spend with Andy and I today. This has been Around the Farm, the podcast about all things ag. Andy Folta and myself, Tom Versman, we're your hosts. If it's your first time listening, please subscribe and give us the like if you enjoyed what you hear. You can get this podcast anywhere you get your podcast, so please subscribe. And this is again sponsored by Climate FieldView.
We'll see you next time Around the Farm.